At the celestial nursery, no one could stop the crying, until a human brought magic. The stellar creche floated like a silver teardrop above the blue atmosphere of the planet Calethis, its hull shimmering against the quiet of orbit. Inside, every corridor glowed with soft bioluminescent veins of light, gentle and alive, tuned to soothe the infants of a dozen alien species. But soothing had long failed. The sound that filled the halls now was wailing, piercing, layered, endless, a chorus of crying that even the station's smart walls could not dampen. Jace Harlan pressed his hands over his ears as he trudged through the corridor with a bucket sloshing faintly at his side. He had been a maintenance technician once on Lunar Station, proud of keeping reactors humming and vents clear. Now, 2 transfers later, he was the sanitation specialist for a daycare orbiting a gas giant full of storms. It paid decently, and no one expected brilliance from him, just silence and clean floors. The crying, though, was becoming unbearable. Even the recycling drones had shut down their vocal acknowledgements to avoid adding to the noise. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. He reached the main nursery dome, where the sound swelled until it vibrated the air like a physical thing. Rows of sleeping pods, or what should have been sleeping pods, lined the curved walls, each occupied by tiny beings of every hue and texture, scaled, furred, or slick-skinned. Some glowed faintly, others pulsed with changing colors, like distressed jellyfish. None were sleeping, none had stopped crying for hours. The caregivers, 6 in total, moved like exhausted ghosts between the pods, their elongated limbs and soft blue skin shimmering faintly beneath the pale light. One of them, Lirana, looked up as Jace entered. Her voice was melodic even through weariness. "Human Harlan, you should not be here. The resonance harms your kind's equilibrium." Jace shrugged. "Equilibrium's overrated. You've tried everything." Her facial ridges trembled in a gesture he'd learned was akin to a sigh. Every lull sequence, every pheromone pattern, the cry resonance began at dawn shift and will not cease. They mirror each other's distress endlessly. "Chain reaction, huh?" he muttered. "Like one baby crying in a nursery back home. Except times 40. He set down his mop and looked around helplessly. He wasn't a caretaker, wasn't even supposed to touch the cradles. His job was to scrub floors, fix clogged vents, and occasionally repair a broken auto feeder. Still, the sight of so many small, miserable faces tugged at something stubborn in him. Humanity didn't do well with helplessness. He approached one pod, where a tiny creature with silver scales and trembling fins wailed, eyes shut tight. The sound made his teeth ache. Jace crouched. "Hey, little guy," he murmured, "you've got quite the lungs." The child didn't understand his words, of course, but tone carried across species more often than people thought. He remembered his niece back on Earth, the way she'd calmed when he made faces, when he did that dumb light trick with his datapad flashlight. He glanced up. The caregivers were busy recalibrating something at the console, a lattice of symbols flickering across holographic panes. He wasn't supposed to interfere, but nobody was watching too closely, and he was desperate to make the noise stop. "All right," he muttered. "Let's try a little human nonsense." From his pocket he pulled a maintenance holoplate, a flat disc used for visual diagnostics. He flicked it on, adjusted the field to manual mode, and cupped it in his hands. Light blossomed, amber and blue swirling in gentle loops. Then he moved his fingers, splitting the projection into smaller threads, weaving them like ribbons between his palms. It wasn't designed for this, but Jace had always had a knack for tinkering. The child's cries faltered. One scaled eyelid cracked open. The light reflected off the tiny pupil, and a thin trill replaced the wail, a curious sound. Encouraged, Jace grinned and twisted the holoplate again. The threads of light spiraled upward, forming the shape of a spinning ring, then a tiny comet that drifted around his wrist. Lirana turned. "What are you—" she began, then stopped. The nearest cluster of infants had gone quiet, their glimmering eyes fixed on the human and the dancing lights. Jace felt sweat bead at his temple. "Just cleaning morale," he said softly, though his voice was unsteady. He shaped another ring, split it into 6 sparks that twined through the air like fireflies. One after another, the children's cries turned to hiccups, then silence. The caregivers froze, wide-eyed. Within minutes, the cacophony that had plagued the creche for half a day faded into a hush. The infants watched transfixed as the human moved his hands, coaxing light from a maintenance tool as though it were a toy of magic. He slowed his motions gradually, letting the last spark settle on his palm before fading out. The silence that followed was profound, so profound that even the air recycler's hum felt sacred. Lirana approached, voice trembling. How did you do that?" Jace rubbed the back of his neck. "Dunno. I used to keep my niece busy with shadows and lights. Kids like motion. Maybe they just needed something to catch their eyes instead of each other's crying." She studied him with awe and a touch of something else, something like reverence. "Your kind channels chaos into harmony. I have read this of humans. I did not believe." He laughed quietly. "We're mostly just good at making do." As the caregivers began tending quietly to the now drowsy infants, Jace stood awkwardly, realizing he'd become the center of attention. He wanted to slip away before someone decided he'd violated a half-dozen interspecies childcare protocols. But Lirana stopped him with a raised hand. "Stay," she said, "please. The resonance could return. Whatever you did, you must teach us." "Teach you?" Jace repeated, startled. "It's not. There's nothing to teach. It's just a trick." "To you," she said, "perhaps. But to them it was something else, something they felt. Stay, human Harlan, for now you are part of the creche." He hesitated. He'd never been called part of anything since leaving Earth. Not really. With a slow nod, he sat down among the glowing pods, the faint smell of sterilized air mixing with the sweet ozone scent of the hololight. When his shift finally ended, Jace returned to his small quarters, with his ears still ringing from phantom cries. He sat on his bunk, staring at the holoplate. He'd stumbled into something. He didn't know what yet, but it felt like the start of a problem he didn't mind having. The next day, the crying started again, though softer. This time, Jace didn't wait to be asked. He grabbed the holoplate and returned to the dome. Lirana and the other caregivers looked both relieved and embarrassed to see him. "They remembered," she said simply, gesturing to the restless infants. "They seek your light." Jace smiled faintly. "Guess I better not disappoint them." He began experimenting. Different shapes, different colors. Spirals of violet and gold, bursts that shimmered like soap bubbles. The aliens were fascinated not only by the effect, but by his process. They began observing him closely, studying the rhythm of his hands, the timing of the glow. He noticed they tried to imitate the motions, but something in their physiology didn't translate. The trick worked only when he did it. Over time, patterns emerged. Some infants calmed faster with slow rotations of color, others with flickering pulses. He started noting details like a scientist, marking each reaction in his maintenance log. The caregivers watched him as though he were performing miracles. One evening, while he rested his hands after a long session, Lirana sat beside him. "You are changing them," she said softly. "Changing them how?" "They respond not to light alone, but to your emotion through it. They feel your intent. It synchronizes them. No one else here has that resonance." Jace blinked. "Emotion resonance, I'm just trying to make them stop crying." She tilted her head, her irises shifting through shades of violet. "Your species broadcasts empathy like warmth. You feel for them, and they feel you back. It is unprecedented." He wasn't sure what to say. He'd heard humans described as emotional animals, but the idea that emotion itself could be a communicative force across biology, he'd never imagined. Days became weeks. Word spread through the station that the human janitor had silenced the endless cry. Scientists came from other decks to observe, to measure, to theorize. Jace tried to ignore them, focusing on the children. He developed routines, lullabies that paired movement and light in rhythm. He discovered that certain harmonics in the holoplate's hum resonated with the aliens' auditory organs, soothing them faster. What began as a trick became an art, and then, slowly, a calling. Still, unease grew alongside wonder. Not everyone approved. One day a figure entered the dome wearing the silver sash of the station's ethics council. Her skin bore darker streaks than Lirana's, her expression unreadable. "Human Harlan," she said. "You have exceeded your maintenance role. Your interaction with the progeny is unauthorized." Jace froze mid-gesture, the light flickering between his hands. "Ma'am, with respect, they were crying non-stop. You introduced uncontrolled psychological stimuli," she interrupted. "We do not understand the long-term effects." Lyrana stepped forward. "He restored balance. Without him, the resonance would have destroyed neural patterns in the young. He saved them." "That remains unverified," the counselor said. "Until we assess the potential risks, your demonstrations are suspended." The infants began to whimper almost immediately, sensing the tension. Their colors dulled. A low hum of distress rippled through the room. Jace felt a knot tighten in his chest. He'd seen this before: bureaucracy choking compassion. He held out the holoplate but didn't activate it. "You think I'm hurting them?" he asked quietly. "Then watch what happens when I stop." The counselor hesitated as the cries grew. Lyrana looked torn between obedience and desperation. Within minutes, the noise returned to full force. The infants clutched at their bedding, tiny limbs trembling. The counselor's composure cracked. "Enough!" she shouted over the din. Jace activated the holoplate. Light flared. The cries cut off almost instantly, replaced by sighs and soft coos. The silence that followed was as undeniable as a confession. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the counselor inclined her head slightly. "Perhaps further study is warranted," she murmured. As she left, Jace let out a shaky breath. Lyrana touched his arm. "You fought for them," she whispered. "Few would." He smiled, tired but proud. "Guess that's what we humans do best. Argue with authority until someone feels better." That night, when the creche finally settled into peaceful slumber, Jace stayed behind. He looked out the viewport at the endless stars, the blue curve of Calethis below. For the first time since he'd left home, he felt he'd done something that mattered. Not because he was trained for it, but because he cared enough to try. Outside, a meteor streaked across the void like one of his light trails. He smiled faintly, imagining the children dreaming of glowing comets and quiet skies. Tomorrow he knew they would cry again. And he would be there, mop in one hand and magic in the other. He didn't realize that in soothing them, he had awakened something deeper, a resonance that would soon ripple far beyond the nursery walls. Jace woke to the soft chime of the station's morning cycle, though there was no real morning in orbit. The artificial lights warmed gradually, mimicking dawn over the oceans of Calethis below. He stretched, bones creaking, and stared for a long moment at the hollow plate resting on his desk. It glowed faintly with residual charge, a quiet promise of another day's challenge. The message blinking on his terminal was less encouraging. Mandatory review, Behavioral Resonance Oversight Division. He scrubbed a hand through his hair and sighed. Guess the magic show's got an audience now. By the time he reached the nursery dome, the air already trembled with restlessness. The infants weren't crying yet, but the hum of their shared agitation was building. The caregivers greeted him with anxious eyes. Lyrana stood apart, her posture tight. "They know," she said softly. They sensed the council's doubt. "Their minds mirror ours." Jace adjusted his toolkit strap. "Then we better not doubt, huh?" He activated the holoplate, but before he could begin, a trio of observers entered the dome. Two were tall Calethians, skin streaked with emerald sigils of authority. Between them floated a spherical drone, its lens unblinking. The lead observer, a male with a voice like stone scraping glass, gestured curtly. "Proceed, human Harlan. We will record the effect." Jace forced a neutral nod and began. The first wave of light flowed from his palms, gentle blues and soft golds, spinning into the familiar spiral. The children stilled almost immediately, eyes fixed, sounds fading to a hush. He moved with practiced ease, shaping arcs and ribbons, modulating rhythm by instinct. The observers said nothing, but the drone's red lens pulsed. Jace could feel its scrutiny like heat on the back of his neck. When he finally released the light, letting it scatter like embers, the silence that followed was complete. Every infant was calm. The lead observer's ridges flexed once. "Repeat with altered color patterns." Jace exhaled through his nose. "You think it's the colors?" "We will determine that," the other said flatly. He obeyed, cycling through hues: violet, green, silver. The effect stayed the same. Calm. The drone emitted a faint hum as it logged data. When they finally departed, One observer paused. "You are anomalous," he said without emotion. "Continue your routine until instructed otherwise." Lirana came to stand beside Jace as the door sealed. "They see you as an experiment," she said quietly. He gave a weary half-smile. "Story of my life." But the next days changed everything. It began when one of the infants, a soft-skinned Calethian child named Shari, reached toward him mid-performance. Not just in fascination. The child's tiny palm glowed faintly in the same amber tone as his light. The color shimmered across her scales, like sunlight through honey. Lirana gasped. "Resonance transference," she whispered. "She mirrors your wavelength," Jace blinked. "Meaning?" "Meaning you are imprinting on them," Lirana said. "Your empathy isn't only calming, it's teaching. They are learning emotion from you." The thought struck him deeper than he expected. These children weren't just soothed by his presence. They were being changed by it. He stared at Shari, who gurgled softly, the glow in her hands fading as she drifted to sleep. Something protective flared inside him, an instinct older than reason. The news spread fast. Within a cycle, scientists filled the dome, setting up sensors and emitters. Jace found himself surrounded by machines mapping his every gesture, tracking his heartbeat, his neural waves. He endured it at first, focusing on the children. But when they started scanning the infants, attaching cold metal bands to their delicate limbs, his patience broke. "Hey," he barked, grabbing a researcher's wrist. "You can't just tag them like lab mice." The alien flinched, confused. "We must quantify the resonance." "They're babies," Jace snapped. "Not data points," Lirana intervened, placing herself between them. "Enough," she said sharply. "Human Harlan is correct. The young respond to comfort, not probes." The scientist retreated, muttering. Jace turned to her, chest tight. "Thanks," she inclined her head. "You remind us of something we forget, that care must come before comprehension." Her words lingered with him long after. That night, alone in his quarters, Jace studied the holoplate under dim light. He realized he hadn't simply stumbled on a trick. He'd uncovered a language. The light, motion, emotion, they formed a triad of communication. Maybe empathy itself was a frequency, one humanity broadcast naturally. It wasn't magic. It was connection. The next day he tried something new. Instead of random shapes, he structured patterns like constellations, forms with rhythm and symmetry, each movement paired with a pulse of intent. Calm, joy, trust. The infants didn't just quiet. They began to hum back, soft, resonant tones that harmonized with his. The air shimmered faintly. Lirana stared, speechless. "They're singing," Jace murmured. They're responding." That was when the drone returned, uninvited, unannounced, and began recording. Hours later, the council summoned him again. In the stark chamber of polished glass, the same silver-sashed counselor faced him. "You have altered the progeny's emotional lattice," she said. "Their development diverges from projected norms." Jace frowned. "For better or worse?" "Unclear, but such divergence is unpredictable. We cannot allow uncontrolled human influence on our young. So you're grounding me?" he asked bitterly. She hesitated. "Temporarily. For a study." He wanted to argue, but the exhaustion in her tone stopped him. They didn't understand what he understood now. To them, emotion was a chemical equation. To humans, it was the language of existence. When he returned to his quarters, he found Lirana waiting. "They will remove you tomorrow," she said quietly. "The creche will lose what peace remains." He slumped onto the bunk. "Figures. Fix something, then get fired for it." Lirana approached slowly. "What you did was more than fix. You gave them balance, and you reminded us that care is not weakness." She reached into a pouch and produced a crystalline data shard. "This holds the pattern sequences from your sessions. If they silence you, I will continue the teaching." He accepted it, touched by the gesture. "Thanks, but it won't work without emotion behind it." Her violet eyes met his. "Then perhaps I must learn that too." The next morning they escorted him from the dome. The infants cried almost immediately, the resonance spreading like wildfire. Lirana looked at him helplessly from across the barrier. The guards urged him forward. The cries grew until the walls vibrated. Jay stopped, turned, and shouted over the noise. "You hear that? That's not disorder, that's grief. They know what you're taking from them." The counselor's face was unreadable. "Go, human. The doors sealed. Within hours, the sound reached the upper decks. Communication relays reported interference. The resonance had amplified beyond the nursery. Systems began registering irregular harmonic fluctuations, like an emotional earthquake shaking the station's core. In his quarters, Jace paced restlessly. Every few minutes, a faint echo of crying reached him through the bulkheads. He clenched his fists. He couldn't just wait. He was human. Waiting while others suffered wasn't in the manual. He grabbed his toolkit, yanked open the vent panel and started crawling. The creche was 8 decks down, security locked, but the maintenance shafts didn't care about regulations. As he moved through the narrow tunnels, the sound grew louder, a pulse of anguish, rhythmic and rising. When he emerged behind the nursery's filtration grid, chaos reigned. The caregivers struggled to calm the infants. Monitors flashed red. Lirana was kneeling amid them, her own composure fracturing under the emotional storm. Jace kicked open the panel and dropped to the floor. "Step aside." The startled caregivers barely reacted before he powered up the hollow plate. Light burst forth brighter than ever, a sun blooming in his hands. The children froze mid-cry, eyes wide. He poured everything he had into the motion, every ounce of warmth, every memory of laughter, of home, of holding his niece on earth while she fell asleep to a flashlight dance. The resonance surged. The light expanded, filling the dome with a living glow. The wails turned to hums, then to silence. For a heartbeat, the entire creche shimmered as if breathing in unison. Then calm settled, deep and steady. Jace swayed, dizzy, but smiled. "Told you," he murmured. "Just needed a little heart in the mix." Lirana caught him before he fell. "You risked your life," she whispered. "Guess that's also in the job description." When the council arrived minutes later, expecting disaster, they found serenity instead. The infants slept. The air thrummed with soft residual warmth, and at the center stood the human, pale but grinning. The lead counselor stared. "How did you stabilize the resonance?" Jace gestured weakly toward the children. "Didn't stabilize anything. Just reminded them it's okay to feel." The council deliberated for hours. By the next day, a decree spread across the station. The human Harlan is to remain attached to the stellar creche as emotional resonance liaison. Jace read it twice before believing it. Lirana found him soon after. "It means you belong," she said simply. He smiled. About time someone figured that out. Over the following weeks, new routines formed. Jace taught the caregivers his techniques, not exact imitations, but approximations infused with their own forms of empathy. He discovered that when multiple species combined intent, the resonance magnified beautifully. The nursery became a place of wonder again, not distress. One evening, as he adjusted the hollow plate's calibration, Lirana approached holding Shari, the infant who had first mirrored his light. "She wishes to see you," she said. Jace took the child gently. The small being reached up, touching his chin with glowing fingers. Her pulse synced with his heartbeat. Lirana watched silently, emotion flickering across her alien features. "You are changing us," she said. "Not just them, all of us." Jace looked down at the tiny face nestled in his arms. Just reminding you what you already had." Outside, through the viewport, Calethis turned slowly, its clouds swirling in endless storms. Yet inside the dome there was peace, a fragile, luminous peace built not from technology, but from understanding. For the first time in the station's history, the stellar creche logged a full 30 rotations without a single instance of crying. The record stood as a quiet miracle, but beyond the walls rumors began to spread, of other colonies seeking the human resonance, of worlds where empathy itself might become the new science. And somewhere deep within the network, the recordings of Jace's performance began circulating among researchers who saw more than magic. They saw power, and power, as Jace would soon learn, never stayed benign for long. The stellar creche had changed. Where once there was sterile quiet and procedural care, there was now laughter, soft alien laughter that vibrated like chimes. Infants no longer cried in unison, but hummed, cooed, and clicked in harmonic patterns. Caregivers smiled more. Even the station's artificial intelligence adapted its environmental tone to gentler cadences. For a while, Jace allowed himself to believe that peace had settled in permanently. But peace, he was learning, was just the stillness before another wave. The first signs came as whispers, requests from other departments for demonstrations. Just brief sessions, they said, for morale research. Then came the visitors, admirals, scholars, planetary envoys. They crowded the observation decks while Jace performed for the infants, their faces lit by the reflection of his light patterns. They applauded politely, but their eyes held calculation. To them it wasn't wonder, it was potential. One evening, Lirana found him sitting alone after the visitors had gone, his hands clasped loosely around the deactivated holoplate. "You feel their hunger," she said quietly. "Yeah," Jace muttered. "They're not thinking about the babies anymore. They're thinking about soldiers, diplomats, ways to amplify human empathy for leverage." Lirana tilted her head. "Empathy as a weapon. Your kind has made stranger tools from gentler things." He gave a rueful smile. "You're not wrong," she sat beside him. "You could refuse." "Can I?" Jace asked. "I work for them, remember? They just changed my title, not my freedom." Her gaze softened. "Then perhaps we must remind them what empathy truly means." The next day the council summoned him again, this time not to question, but to propose. In the grand conference hall, surrounded by shimmering data walls, the lead counselor gestured toward a projection. A human soldier encircled by alien allies, glowing faintly with resonance energy. "We believe your ability can be replicated through training. Imagine units of mixed species, all synchronized through emotional harmonics. Conflicts could end before they begin." Jace studied the image, unease crawling through him. "You're talking about broadcasting feelings like radio signals." "Precisely," said a scientist eagerly. "Controlled empathy modulation. A weapon of peace," he laughed once, hollow. "There's no such thing." The counselor's eyes narrowed. "You forget your position, human Harlan. Your gift belongs to all sentient kind." "No," Jace said, standing. "It belongs to connection, to trust. You start bottling that and it stops being empathy. It becomes manipulation." The silence afterward was heavy. He expected punishment, maybe confinement. But instead, the counselor only said, "You may keep your duties within the creche. For now." He left the hall feeling like he'd just dodged a meteor. Days passed. The nursery remained peaceful, but Jace could feel the shift. New sensors installed discreetly in corners, visitors recording data under the guise of observation. Even the AI's tone had changed, its soothing cadence laced with analytic curiosity. "Your actions generate measurable neuro-resonant coherence, Technician Harlan," it said one morning. "Would you consent to a deeper synchronization scan?" "Not today, thanks," he muttered. He began taking precautions. Every time he performed for the children, he limited the holoplate's range, masking frequencies he suspected the sensors were capturing. Lirana noticed but said nothing. She simply watched him with that patient wisdom he was coming to depend on. One rotation later, the interference began. The first child to be affected was Shari, the same infant who had once mirrored his light. She awoke screaming, a piercing psychic wail that shattered the calm. Her skin flickered erratically, alternating between colors Jace had never seen before, ultraviolet pulses and deep infrared bands. The resonance spread instantly. The others followed suit. Jace rushed in, heart pounding. "What happened?" Lirana pointed to the central console. They attempted a remote resonance trigger, unauthorized. They wanted to prove they could replicate you. He stared at the data feeds, disbelief curdling into fury. The council had done it. They'd tried to mechanize empathy, and now the children were suffering for it. He activated the holoplate, flooding the dome with warm light. The infants' cries wavered but didn't stop. Their bodies vibrated with feedback energy, pain radiating through their shared network. Jace gritted his teeth. They're caught in a loop. The machine's feeding their fear back into itself. Lirana grabbed his shoulder. "Can you break it?" "I can try." He closed his eyes, focused. He slowed his breathing, thinking not of fixing, but of feeling, remembering the first time he'd held a crying child, the helpless ache that turned into comfort. The light from his hands shifted from gold to deep amber, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Gradually, the infant's colors stabilized. The wailing diminished to soft whimpers. When the last cry faded, Jace nearly collapsed. Lirana steadied him. "You stopped it." He nodded weakly. "Fear, but someone's going to answer for what they did." They filed an official report, but no response came. The council went silent, their communications under review. It was clear they were covering it up. That night, Jace found himself in the maintenance bay, staring at the great observation window. Stars drifted past like slow embers. "They'll do it again," he said softly. "If not here, somewhere else." Lirana joined him, hands clasped. "Then we must make it impossible." "How?" "By spreading the truth before they can weaponize it." Jace looked at her. "You want to go public? Broadcast across the network?" She nodded. "If empathy is to be shared, let it be as understanding, not control." He hesitated. What she proposed bordered on treason, but as he gazed out at the stars, he realized that silence was no longer an option. Humanity had brought empathy to this place. It couldn't let it be twisted. They worked in secret over the next rotations. Using maintenance relays, Jace piggybacked encrypted transmissions through the station's cleaning drone network. No one ever checked those logs. Lirana compiled data, annotated with her own findings on emotional resonance as a natural living field. Together they built what they called the Harmonic Manifesto. It wasn't just a report. It was a message to every species that might listen. A call to see empathy as shared strength, not a tool to bend others. When they sent it, the data packets scattered like seeds into the vast communication lattice. It would take weeks to reach nearby systems. They could only hope someone would care enough to listen. The retaliation came faster than expected. The next day, security officers stormed the creche. Jace barely had time to shield Lirana before a voice thundered through the comms. "Human Harlan, you are charged with unauthorized dissemination of restricted research." He raised his hands. "Restricted? You mean stolen from children?" They bound his wrists anyway. Lirana stepped forward, defiant. He acted for the welfare of all. "You shame yourselves." "Stand down," the officer said coldly. Jace caught her gaze as they led him away. "Don't stop the lights," he whispered. They confined him in a glass cell isolated from network access. Days blurred. No visitors, no word, only the endless hum of the ship and the faint ache of distance. He worried for the children, for Lirana, for what the council might do. Then one night the lights flickered, a pattern rhythmic and familiar. 3 short pulses, too long. The resonance signal. He pressed his hand to the glass. "Lirana!" A faint shimmer answered him from the corridor's end. Her voice, carried through the vibration of the walls, whispered, "They cannot silence what is felt." The message spread. "Other stations are asking questions." "You have started something." Jace exhaled, relief washing over him. "Guess the janitor's making headlines." "More than headlines," she said. "The Harmonic Manifesto reached the Council on Vereen Prime. They demand full inquiry." He laughed softly. "Good. Let them feel a little empathy for once." 2 cycles later, the locks on his cell disengaged. A neutral voice announced, "By order of the Interstellar Concord, Technician Harlan is to be released pending inquiry." Outside, the corridors were busier than he remembered, filled not with guards but with diplomats and envoys. Whispers followed him as he walked. The human, the resonant. When he finally returned to the creche, he found it unchanged, still glowing softly, still humming with peace. Lirana met him at the entrance. "You are free," she said simply. He smiled faintly. "Feels weird." "The inquiry will take time," she continued, "but the Concord forbids further weaponization of resonance. They declared it a sacred field, an interspecies heritage." He blinked. "They did what?" Her lips curved. "You changed policy, Jace Harlan," with light and compassion. He looked around the nursery at the children asleep in their pods, each glowing faintly with soft warmth. For the first time he allowed himself to breathe easy, but peace he knew would need guardians. And beyond the viewport, in the silence between stars, other powers were already calculating how to reclaim what they'd lost. Still, for now, the stellar creche stood as proof of what one act of human kindness could spark, a wave of connection, spreading through the cold vacuum of space. Jace smiled, whispered, "Let's keep the lights on," and began preparing the next lesson. The stellar creche drifted above Calethis like a sanctuary of light, but Jace could feel the tension growing beneath the peace. The Concord's proclamation had spread across the known systems. Resonance is sacred. It sounded noble on paper, but enforcement was another story. Reports trickled in of corporations conducting empathy studies in deep orbit, of governments experimenting with human emotional fields under new names. The same hunger that had driven the Council was spreading wider, only now it wore the mask of enlightenment. Jace had expected this. You couldn't hand an entire galaxy a new form of power and expect restraint. But what unsettled him most wasn't the politics. It was the changes happening inside the creche itself. The infants were evolving faster than predicted. Their eyes followed him with uncanny awareness, their hums synchronizing not just with his gestures, but with his unspoken thoughts. Once, while he'd been brooding quietly about his confinement, several of them had begun to cry simultaneously, echoing his guilt. When he'd smiled again, they'd stopped. Lyrana had noticed too. "They are attuning to you," she said one night, as they stood by the viewing dome watching the storm bands on Calethis twist below. "Their minds extend further each cycle. You may soon become their emotional anchor." Jace frowned. "You make that sound like a problem." "It could be. If you are harmed, their equilibrium might collapse. They trust you more than any other being on this station." He rubbed his temples. "So I'm basically their emotional reactor core." "Great." Her eyes softened. "Perhaps it is simply what you are meant for." He wasn't so sure. Humanity had been accused of many things: ambition, curiosity, recklessness, but not of being anyone's emotional cornerstone. Yet here he was, a janitor turned caretaker of alien minds. He could almost hear his old supervisor laughing at the absurdity. Weeks passed. The station adapted to new rhythms. Caregivers learned fragments of his technique, blending them into their own traditions. Jace even taught classes on resonant empathy, though he hated the bureaucratic title. The children thrived, growing stronger, calmer, more attuned to one another. Sometimes he caught them humming patterns he hadn't taught, original harmonics that vibrated pleasantly through the metal floors. But outside, unrest brewed. The Concord had banned weaponization, yet rumors of Black Ops resonance divisions persisted. A transport from the outer colonies arrived one morning, requesting a demonstration for scientific validation. The Council protested, but the Concord forced compliance. Transparency, they called it. The delegation that arrived wasn't what Jace expected. Their uniforms were sleek, their insignia strange, neither Concord nor Calethian. Their leader, a human woman named Dr. Kale, smiled too easily. "Technician Harlan," she greeted, extending a hand. "I've read every report on your work." "It's an honor." He shook her hand cautiously. "Appreciate that. You're with the Concord's research branch?" "Independent oversight," she said smoothly. "We're developing protocols for ethical resonance interfaces. Your insights are invaluable." He didn't like the sound of that. Interfaces. Her smile widened. "Imagine connecting species not just emotionally, but cognitively. Instant empathy through technology. No more miscommunication. No more war until someone hacks it," Jace muttered. Kyle laughed softly. Ever the cynic. "You should have more faith in progress." He wanted to believe her, but the word interface lingered like static. She spent the day observing his sessions with the children, asking questions too precise to be innocent. Wavelength stability, cognitive synchronization latency, neural reflection thresholds. He answered vaguely, and when she asked for access to his holoplate code, he lied outright. After she left, Lyrana found him disassembling the holoplate in his quarters. "You hide its heart," she said quietly. He looked up, startled. "Shia, I think she's after it. They'll reverse engineer empathy if I let them, can they?" "Not without feeling it," he said grimly. "But that won't stop them from trying." Lyrana watched as he extracted the core crystal and sealed it in a containment sphere. "Then hide it well. The children must never be used." That night, alarms woke him. The creche shuddered as emergency lights flared crimson. Over comms, voices shouted about a hull breach in Section 7, Dr. Kale's ship. Jace sprinted down the corridor, heart hammering. He reached the observation deck just in time to see Kyle's vessel detach from its dock, engines burning bright. Security pods launched after it, too slow. A data siphon trace blinked on the console. She'd stolen something. Lyrana appeared beside him, breathless. "What has she taken?" Jay stared at the data log, realization sinking in. "The resonance scans. Everything I've done, the frequencies, emotional patterns, even my neural profile." Her face paled. "She means to replicate you. Not just me," he said. "Human empathy. Synthetic version." In the following days, the station descended into uneasy silence. Concord vessels traced Kale's route toward the frontier systems, but news was scarce. The Council forbade further resonance work, fearing infiltration. Jace hated it. The enforced stillness, the unspoken dread. The children felt it too. Their songs dimmed, their light fading. He tried to keep routine, cleaning, calibrating, pretending things were normal. But at night, he dreamed of cities trembling under waves of emotion not their own, manufactured feelings weaponized like fire. Then, 2 weeks later, a distress signal arrived from a mining colony on Vereen Prime. The message was fragmented, but one phrase repeated amid static. They made it feel wrong. Everyone's connected. Everyone's screaming. Jace's blood ran cold. They used it, he whispered. Kyle used the resonance field. Within hours, the Concord assembled an emergency delegation. Lyrana pleaded with him to stay, but he refused. If this is my fault, I fix it, he said. The council granted him passage under one condition, that he bring the original harmonic matrix, the one hidden within his holoplate core. You created this phenomenon, they told him. Perhaps only you can undo it. He stared at the containment sphere in his hands, feeling its faint thrum like a heartbeat. Let's hope you're still magic, he murmured. The journey to Vereen Prime took 4 days in warp transit. He spent the time studying reports, piecing together what Kyle had done. She'd built a resonance amplifier, massive, orbital, tuned to the frequency of human empathy. But without real emotion to stabilize it, the system had inverted, amplifying fear instead of comfort. The colony's population, all linked through the field, had become trapped in collective panic, a storm of shared terror feeding on itself. When his transport arrived, the sight chilled him. The colony domes flickered with intermittent light, their power grids overloaded by psychic feedback. Through the viewport, he could see people moving erratically, clutching their heads, some frozen in silent screams. The Concord commander turned to him grimly. If we shut it down abruptly, their neural links might collapse. We need a harmonizer, someone who can replace the signal. Jace nodded slowly. I can try. They brought him to the amplifier's control chamber, a cathedral of steel and glass filled with the low hum of machines feeding the corrupted resonance. He could feel it before he even touched the interface, the wrongness like static inside his bones. Fear pressed against his thoughts, invasive and cold. He steadied himself, unpacking the containment sphere. The core crystal pulsed faintly. You started this with a janitor's trick, he whispered. Guess we finish it the same way. He placed the crystal into the central conduit. The system reacted instantly, energy spiraling outward. The walls glowed gold, then red, then a chaotic blur. Jace closed his eyes and focused, not on control but on feeling. He remembered the children's laughter, Lyrana's calm voice, the warmth of small hands clutching his finger. He thought of Earth's sunsets, of home, of quiet mornings before the world woke. He poured it all into the light. Gradually the color stabilized, shifting from red to amber. The resonance trembled, hesitated, and began to harmonize. Across the colony, screams softened, movement slowed. He felt minds easing, fear dissolving. The field was stabilizing through him, like a human heart beating at the center of a storm. But the strain was immense. The amplifier wasn't built for a living conduit. Energy surged through his nerves, pain flaring bright. Voices whispered at the edge of hearing, thousands of terrified minds clinging to his calm. He gritted his teeth, whispering, "It's okay. You're safe. Just breathe with me." Minutes passed like hours. Then slowly the resonance settled into steady rhythm. The lights dimmed, systems stabilized. The Concord technicians stared in disbelief. "He did it," one murmured. Jace swayed but stayed upright. "They'll need care," he said hoarsely. "Gentle re-entry. Keep the field low for a few days." As medics rushed to the surface, the commander approached. "You saved a world, Harlan." He shook his head. "Just fixed what shouldn't have been broken." Later, as he lay in the infirmary, Lyrana's recorded message arrived through secure channel. Her holographic form flickered beside his bed. "You did what only a human could," she said softly. "You gave feeling to a machine and turned chaos to calm. The children sing your name in harmonic patterns. We await your return," Jace smiled weakly. "Tell them the janitor's coming home." He gazed out the viewport where the stars burned steady again. Humanity had made many mistakes, but maybe, just maybe, they could learn to feel their way through the dark. Still, as he drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought lingered. If empathy could save, it could also control. And somewhere out there, someone would try again. But for now the light held. When the transport returned to the stellar creche, the children's songs greeted it before the docking clamps even closed. Through the hull came the faint harmonic hum Jace had missed for weeks, notes that shimmered like warmth through steel. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, and for the first time since Vereen Prime his heartbeat matched the rhythm. He was exhausted, scarred from the overload that had nearly burned his nerves to ash, but alive. And more than that, he carried proof that empathy could outlast even the machines that tried to steal it. The docking bay doors opened onto familiar blue-white corridors. Lyrana was there waiting, her posture regal despite the tremor of relief in her voice. "Welcome home, human Harlan," she said softly. "The children have felt your return for 2 rotations." Jace smiled, shoulders sagging under the weight of survival. "Guess I'm not great at keeping surprises. They dreamed of light," she said, "of warmth returning. You became their star." He stepped forward, clasped her hands briefly. "I'm just the janitor who refuses to quit." But her answering glance told him she didn't believe that, not anymore. Together they walked through the curved passage toward the nursery dome, their footsteps echoing against the living walls. The soft glow of the corridor followed them, brightening subtly as though welcoming him back. Inside, the creche was transformed. The pods were open now, rearranged into communal clusters, where the young of multiple species rested together. The air shimmered with faint motes of biolight. When Jace entered, a wave of gentle sound rose from the children. Tiny chirps, hums, and trills that merged into a chord of recognition. He knelt instinctively, laughing through sudden tears. "Hey there, troublemakers," he murmured. "Miss me?" Several of the little ones crawled closer, glowing faintly as their harmonic fields brushed his. The warmth seeped into him like the first breath after a storm. Behind him, Lyrana whispered, "They grew stronger while you were gone. They learned to harmonize without constant guidance." He nodded, pride swelling in his chest. "Good, they'll need to someday." But rest was short-lived. Within hours of his arrival, Concord representatives requested a private meeting. This time there were no threats, only gratitude and calculation cloaked in courtesy. The spokesperson, a serene being of translucent skin and mirrored eyes, bowed deeply. "Technician Harlan, your stabilization of Vereen Prime prevented systemic psychic collapse. Entire colonies owe you existence. We wish to establish an academy for harmonic studies, beginning here." Jace leaned back, suspicion prickling. "An academy sounds nice. But what's the curriculum? Understanding empathy or bottling it again?" The delegate smiled, reflective face unreadable. "Understanding first. Containment only if necessary." He chuckled dryly. "That's what they always say before the fences go up." The Concord didn't argue. "Regardless, we ask that you serve as chief instructor. Humanity must guide this science. None can replace what you embody." He stared at the table, thinking of Kale's stolen data, of how easily wonder turned to weapon. Yet he also thought of the children's songs, of their luminous eyes when they saw him. Maybe if he stayed he could shape how the next chapter began. "I'll do it," he said finally. "But on one condition, no experiments without empathy. Every lesson, every test must begin with care, not control." The Concord delegate inclined their head. "Agreed. We will enshrine it as the first principle of harmonic science." When they left, Lyrana found him gazing through the viewport. "You trust them?" she asked. "I trust potential," he said quietly. Even hours. The weeks that followed were unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Delegations arrived from dozens of worlds, scientists, caretakers, philosophers. Jace taught them not formulas but feelings, how rhythm mirrored breath, how intention shaped resonance, how compassion stabilized energy better than any algorithm. The lessons spread fast. Soon other creches adopted harmonic caretaking, and incidents of infant distress across colonies plummeted. Humanity had given the stars something new, a shared emotional grammar. Still, Jace remained wary. At night he'd pace the observation deck, watching freighters glitter through orbit and wondering which ones carried echoes of Kale's failed machine. No one had found her body. Some said she'd fled beyond conquered space, chasing a purer version of control. Others whispered she'd dissolved inside her own creation. Jace wasn't sure which fate was worse. One evening, as he adjusted a light sequence for the older children, Lyrana approached carrying a crystalline tablet. "We received transmission from the frontier," she said. It seems your manifesto inspired more than policy. Small colonies have begun human empathy circles, rituals where different species share memories through resonance. They call it the Harlan method. He groaned softly. Great, I've become a method, she smiled. A symbol, perhaps. One of unity. Symbols get twisted, he said. Let's make sure this one stays kind. The next rotation brought unexpected guests, a trio of humans from Earth, wearing the insignia of the Global Coalition. They bowed respectfully, though he sensed corporate undercurrents beneath their polished manners. Technician Harlan, their leader, began, Earth owes you its gratitude. You've shown the galaxy what we stand for. But we also have concerns. You're giving away knowledge that could make humanity unparalleled. Jace crossed his arms. Unparalleled's just another word for lonely, the man hesitated. With your resonance technology, Earth could lead into species relations, maybe even end wars preemptively. Jace's jaw tightened. You mean decide who deserves peace? That's not leadership. That's puppetry. The delegation left soon after, their smiles brittle. Lirana watched them depart and said softly, They do not yet understand that empathy cannot be owned. He rubbed his neck. They will, eventually. Or the universe will remind them the hard way. Days blurred into months. The academy flourished. Jace taught less by demonstration now, and more by conversation, guiding others to find their own harmonics. The children he'd once soothed grew into young beings of startling awareness, their collective songs echoing faintly even through the outer corridors. Sometimes he'd pause mid-lecture, listening to their melody weaving through the air and feel something akin to faith. But he knew this peace couldn't last forever. Knowledge never stayed gentle for long. He'd made his peace with that too. If misuse came again, there would be others ready to set it right. Others who'd learned that empathy wasn't weakness, but power restrained by love. One night, during the creche's 3rd anniversary celebration, the lights dimmed across the station. The hum of the children shifted into a slow, steady tone, deeper than before. Lirana turned toward him, eyes wide. They are initiating, she whispered. Initiating what? The Great Resonance. It's how our kind marks the moment of collective awareness. But it's never happened this early, and never across species. Jace felt the vibration crawl up his spine. The infants, toddlers now, stood in small groups, hands or tendrils or fins touching. Light spilled from them in intricate waves, converging in the air above. The glow coalesced into a single luminous sphere, pulsing gently, almost breathing. Every being in the dome fell silent. Lirana's voice trembled. They're harmonizing beyond emotion, they're speaking as one. The sphere pulsed again, and for a heartbeat, Jace heard something. Not words, but meaning, gratitude, belonging, affection. It was like being seen by a sunrise. Tears stung his eyes. They're saying thank you, Lirana nodded, awed. To you, he shook his head. To all of us. For listening. The sphere dissolved into a cascade of motes that drifted through the air, settling like stardust on every face. When the glow faded, laughter bubbled up, pure, uncontained. The creche rang with joy. Afterward, as the celebration quieted and the caregivers tended to the sleepy young, Jace stood by the viewport once more. Calethis turned slowly beneath, its clouds illuminated by the system's twin suns. Lirana joined him, her reflection soft in the glass. You gave them a gift, she said. A bridge none thought possible. He smiled faintly. Lana just showed them the flashlight trick. She tilted her head, amused. And what will you do now, human Harlan? Continue teaching, or finally rest? He considered. The stars beyond the glass seemed endless, glittering with promise and risk alike. Maybe both, he said. There'll always be someone crying out there. Might as well bring a little light. She touched his arm gently. Then may your light never fade. He looked back at the nursery, where the children slept beneath a soft aurora of their own making. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe the universe might remember humanity, not for conquest or invention, but for something simpler, something stubborn and tender, he whispered, almost to himself. We're small, but we shine anyway. Lirana smiled, the phrase translating oddly yet beautifully in her language. Then let that be humanity's magic. Outside, a comet crossed the black, trailing a ribbon of silver flame. Its reflection caught in the dome's glass, splitting into 1,000 points of light. Jace watched it fade, then turned back to the sleeping children. Tomorrow they would wake and someone somewhere would try again to bend empathy to power. But tonight the stellar crèche was quiet, its harmony whole. And in that silence, soft, golden, infinite, Jace Harlan finally rested, a human among stars, keeper of light that no one could cage.